You've tried to be good, haven't you? To grow, to heal, to become whole. You've looked for light wherever darkness once lived, hoping that if you learned enough, prayed enough, forgave enough, the ache inside would finally rest. But somewhere between effort and exhaustion, a quiet realization begins to whisper. The parts of you that suffer don't actually want to be healed. They want to be seen. There's a strange tenderness in that. The very thing you've spent your life escaping, your fear, your anger, your envy, has been waiting like a wounded animal, not for salvation, but for acknowledgement. It hides behind your voice when it trembles. It lingers in your dreams, painting scenes you'd rather forget. You've named it weakness, failure, and sin. Yet beneath those names, it breathes, ancient and loyal, watching every attempt you make to silence it. Sometimes you feel it at night, the stillness before sleep when every mask falls. In that space, there's no pretending. The calm surface of your mind ripples, revealing faces you thought you buried long ago. You turn away, hoping the daylight will erase them. But it never does, because what hides within you is not gone. It waits. Healing is not a victory march. It's a slow unmasking, and each layer you peel away reveals another truth that stings a little deeper. You start to notice the subtle resistance, the way your body tenses when someone gets too close to your pain, the way your thoughts twist when love demands vulnerability. You speak of light, but some part of you knows that without the shadow, there would be nothing to define its glow. You wonder why transformation feels like dying. Why every step toward peace seems to tear something open. Maybe it's because what you call healing is often just another disguise for control. You want to manage your chaos, not meet it. You want forgiveness without confession, rebirth without burial. But the psyche doesn't play by your rules. It doesn't care for your timelines or your affirmations. It knows what you've forgotten, that the shadow is not an intruder, but the keeper of your truth. And so it resists. Every time you reach for the light, it pulls you back into the depths. Not to punish, but to balance. Because what you're calling pain might actually be your soul reclaiming its wholeness. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it. The faint heartbeat beneath the noise. The echo that says, "Don't fix me. Remember me." You're standing at the edge of that echo now. Between the known and the unknown, between the person you show the world and the one who hides beneath. The air feels heavy, almost sacred. Something inside begins to stir, not fear, but recognition. You've met this presence before, though you've never dared to hold its gaze for long. Tonight you might. The forest of your mind grows quiet. The leaves whisper secrets you once refused to hear. There's a door, half open, breathing in the dark. You can step through if you choose. But understand this. Once you do, nothing will return to the way it was. Because what waits beyond healing is not peace as you've imagined it, it's truth. And truth, in its purest form, doesn't soothe. It transforms. And yet, something in you is ready. Not ready to heal. Ready to meet the one who never wanted to. There's a quiet irony in the idea of healing. You believe it means making peace with what hurts, mending what's been broken, finding light in the darkness. But the psyche doesn't follow the logic of medicine or morality. It doesn't divide the self into clean and dirty, pure and impure. To the unconscious, everything belongs. What you call shadow is not a sickness to be cured. It's a living intelligence that refuses to be tamed by your ideals of goodness. You were taught to separate light from darkness, to treat pain as failure and desire as sin. Yet in the language of the soul, darkness is not the opposite of light, but its womb. It is the fertile ground where consciousness takes root, the place where forgotten instincts and emotions dwell, waiting for you to remember. When Jung spoke of the shadow, he wasn't describing evil. He was describing life itself, unfiltered and raw, wearing the faces you're too civilized to show. The shadow does not bow to therapy or affirmation. It moves in silence, shaping your moods, your cravings, your sudden outbursts. It whispers in the choices you can't explain, the people you're drawn to, the fears that follow you through years of progress. You think you're escaping it through growth, but each effort to rise pulls it closer. Because the deeper truth is simple. The shadow doesn't want to be healed. It wants to be whole. Healing implies hierarchy. It assumes that something is wrong, something must be fixed, that light must win over dark. But the soul doesn't evolve through conquest. It evolves through union. The alchemists knew this, though they spoke in symbols. They said that gold is born when opposites marry, when sulfur meets mercury, when the king embraces the queen. You might call it integration, but to the soul, it feels like surrender. You can't heal what you still despise. And most of what you call shadow still carries the shame you inherited from others. The emotions you were told not to feel, the impulses you were punished for, the hungers you denied until they turned to poison. Each time you rejected a part of yourself, you created a wound that waits for recognition. But that wound doesn't want your pity. It wants your presence. It wants to know that even in its ugliness, it is still part of the divine order. There's an ancient rhythm to this dance. The shadow pushes, the ego resists. The more light you chase, the darker the outline of what you ignore becomes. Eventually you realize that light doesn't conquer darkness, it reveals it. What you see depends on your courage to look. And to look without judgment is to love in its purest form. That love is not sentimental. It burns. It strips away illusions. It humbles you until all that remains is truth. Imagine the psyche as a temple built in layers. The upper chambers glow with reason, faith, and ideals. But below, in the stone corridors, lives everything you've ever feared. The monsters, the desires, and the rage. They are not your enemies. They are your gatekeepers. Until you descend and meet them, the temple remains incomplete. You can decorate the upper halls with light, but the foundation will always tremble. Every time you dream of falling, of being chased, of losing control, it's the shadow calling. It does not speak your language. It speaks in images, in emotion, in instinct. It is not rational because it predates reason. It remembers what your mind forgets. And when it surfaces, it's not to destroy you, but to restore balance. To remind you that your wholeness cannot exist without what you've buried. You see, the journey of consciousness is not about escaping the dark. It's about discovering the light that flickers within it. The moon does not resist the night, it shines because of it. So too does the self. The more you fight your shadow, the more it consumes your strength. The moment you turn toward it, something changes. It softens. It listens. It begins to recognize that you are not its enemy. And maybe that's where the paradox unfolds. You spend years trying to heal what was never broken. You call it therapy, prayer, and progress. But the shadow doesn't need your repair. It needs your attention. It needs you to see what it protects, the raw pulse of your humanity, unedited, unapologetic. It's not darkness that makes you suffer. It's your refusal to hold its hand. So when the shadow resists healing, it isn't sabotaging you. It's saving you from false light, the kind that blinds rather than illuminates. It's pulling you back into the soil so you can learn how to root, how to feel, how to remember what you are beyond ideals and guilt. You're not meant to transcend your darkness. You're meant to love through it. Because somewhere deep within, the shadow and the light are not enemies at all. They are two sides of the same divine breath, inhaling and exhaling eternity. You wake up one morning and the air feels heavy. Not from the weather, but from something unsaid that moves beneath your ribs. You can't name it, yet you feel it everywhere. A subtle weight that turns your thoughts inward, that slows your breath. You tell yourself it's just another day, but the silence disagrees. It hums softly, like a presence that's been waiting. The world looks the same, but your perception has shifted. Something inside you is stirring. Something you've tried to bury under years of effort and explanation. At first, it appears as irritation, the way small things suddenly feel unbearable. The delay of a message, a careless glance, a forgotten promise. Your reactions surprise you. You think you've outgrown this kind of restlessness. But the truth is, it's never left. It has only changed its mask. This is the shadow announcing itself, disguised as your most familiar emotions. It doesn't crash the door, it seeps through the cracks. It enters quietly, reclaiming the corners of your mind you thought you'd conquered. The psyche speaks through symbols, and the shadow is its most eloquent language. It doesn't shout. It seduces, weaving memory into sensation, fear into desire. The past and present blur until you can no longer tell where the wound began. You start to feel haunted, but not by ghosts, by fragments of yourself that refuse to die. They move like reflections in broken glass, shimmering, distorted, calling you to remember what you've forgotten. The mirror doesn't lie, it simply waits for your gaze. You look closer and realize that healing was never about light. It was about courage. The courage to look without flinching, to let what is ugly exist without disguise. Every time you avoid your reflection, you abandon a part of your soul. The shadow collects these abandonments. It becomes the keeper of all you have exiled. And when it grows too full, it comes for you. Not out of vengeance, but necessity. It knows what the ego denies, that wholeness requires everything. So the day you feel most fragmented might actually be the day your integration begins. The cracks are not proof of failure, but openings through which light can enter. You think you are falling apart, but in truth, the structure that cannot hold truth is collapsing. The forest of your psyche trembles, and beneath its soil, roots begin to rearrange themselves. Something ancient remembers its rhythm. And though it hurts, this is not punishment, it is invitation. The shadow is not destroying you. It's bringing you back to yourself. The descent happens slowly, often disguised as fatigue. You stop forcing smiles. You stop pretending the noise helps. You crave solitude, though it frightens you. The world calls it withdrawal, but in truth, it's incubation. The soul retracts to restore its depth. You begin to see how much of your light was performative, how often you used positivity as armor. The shadow waits for these moments when your defenses weaken. It doesn't need you to fight, it needs you to stop running. You feel like you're walking through a forest at night. Every path looks the same, every sound multiplies your fear. But something keeps you moving forward, some faint instinct stronger than dread. The deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes. The chatter of your thoughts fades until you hear only your breathing. It's rhythmic, almost ritualistic. Each inhale is surrender, each exhale release. You start to sense that you are not alone. The darkness watches, but not with malice. It watches with patience. In Jung's vision, the forest symbolizes the unconscious. To enter it is to leave the known, to abandon the guidance of reason and light. Here, language breaks down. What remains are symbols, sensations, archetypes. The dreamlike terrain of the inner world. You meet figures that reflect your fears and desires. Some appear monstrous, others divine. Yet all share the same essence. They are masks of your own forgotten self. You realize that the monsters don't chase you. They reveal you. The fire of awareness flickers as you walk. You begin to see that the shadow feeds on avoidance. The more you look away, the more power it gathers. When you turn toward it, something shifts. The figures lose their menace. Their eyes soften. They begin to mirror your own expression. You start to understand that fear is not an enemy but a threshold. It's the body's language for transformation. The moment you stop resisting, fear dissolves into presence. And in that stillness, you remember. Healing was never about erasing pain but learning to sit beside it. The forest doesn't need to be escaped. It needs to be explored. The path is made not by force but by acceptance. Every step into darkness teaches you how to see without light. And slowly your eyes adjust. You begin to perceive shapes within the void, movements within stillness. The unknown no longer feels like danger. It feels like home. Time loses shape in the underworld of the mind. Days blur, sleep deepens, dreams grow vivid. You start to see patterns, synchronicities that feel like whispers from another dimension. The psyche begins to orchestrate your encounters, arranging symbols as lessons. You notice a song, a word, a stranger's gaze repeating across days. None of it feels random. The shadow speaks through coincidence. It is not trying to scare you. It is trying to get your attention. The ego, however, resists. It wants clarity, not mystery. It wants progress, not paradox. It wants control. But the unconscious has no use for control. It wants truth. And truth often feels like chaos at first. The moment you stop fighting, something begins to align. The storm outside becomes silence within. You begin to sense the invisible architecture of your transformation. The same pain that once suffocated you now feels like initiation. There's a river in this inner world. Its water is black but reflective. When you kneel beside it, you see your own face shimmer across its surface. The reflection doesn't smile back. It studies you curious. You reach out, and the image trembles. This is the moment of confrontation. The shadow doesn't demand repentance. It demands intimacy. It wants you to look until you see no difference between your light and your darkness. You begin to see how healing was always a negotiation between opposites. The conscious and the unconscious, the sun and the moon, the king and the serpent. You've spent your life trying to ascend, forgetting that growth also means descent. The river carries both directions at once. Its current flows toward the sea, yet its source is the mountain's shadow. You realize you cannot reach one without passing through the other. When you rise from the riverbank, something inside is changed. Not a revelation, but a recognition. You feel heavier and lighter at once, as if something long imprisoned has begun to breathe again. You don't call it healing anymore. You call it remembering. The shadow hasn't vanished. It walks beside you now, silent, loyal, and awake. The nights grow longer inside you. The outer world keeps moving, but your rhythm has changed. You're no longer chasing meaning through noise. You're listening instead. The silence begins to shape you, carving away what isn't real. You notice how much of your suffering was rooted in resistance. You didn't want to feel small. You didn't want to feel lost. You thought you could bypass the abyss with knowledge or faith. But the abyss was never the enemy. It was the mirror of your becoming. At some point, the darkness stops frightening you. It begins to feel like an embrace. Not warm, but honest. It doesn't flatter or promise. It simply holds space for what is. You start to see that even your flaws have purpose. Every envy, every rage, every longing was a distorted form of love, trapped in disguise. The shadow never hated you. It loved you too fiercely to stay invisible. It was willing to ruin your peace if that was the only way to bring you home. The alchemists called this the nigredo, the blackening, the stage where everything dissolves into chaos so that transformation can begin. You live it not in books, but in your own bloodstream. Old identities fall away. Desires shift. The stories that once defined you lose their power. You begin to sense a strange purity in the emptiness. The ego grieves, but the soul exhales. It has waited lifetimes for this kind of surrender. You walk through your inner forest differently now. The fear has turned into curiosity. The whispers have turned into guidance. Even the shadows move with grace. They don't follow you. They lead you toward the fire at the center of the woods. It burns without smoke, without destruction. You realize this is the heart of your unconscious, the eternal flame that never went out. You feared it for years, mistaking it for danger. But it was your own power calling you back. When you step closer, the heat doesn't burn. It cleanses. Memories rise through the flames like smoke, moments you once hid from yourself. You see them all with clarity now. The mistakes, the guilt, and the tenderness you denied. Nothing is wasted. Everything is fuel. You understand that what you call pain was never punishment. It was purification. The fire does not destroy you. It returns you to gold. After the fire comes the light, but not the blinding light you once chased. This one is softer, more patient. It doesn't ask you to transcend. It invites you to inhabit, to live as both heaven and earth at once. You begin to understand that enlightenment was never about rising above. It was about going deep enough to include everything. The divine doesn't fear shadow. It created it as contrast, as texture, as rhythm for the infinite play of existence. You start noticing beauty in the smallest things. The way morning light moves across a wall. The way a stranger's voice trembles when they speak their truth. The way silence feels alive after confession. Your perception expands, not through ecstasy, but through intimacy. Every breath feels sacred because you finally belong to yourself. You no longer chase wholeness as a goal. You live it as a state of being. The shadow, once your adversary, now becomes your ally. It reminds you when you're lying to yourself, when your love is performative, when your peace is pretending. It whispers honesty into your illusions. It keeps you humble, grounded, and real. You begin to see that the divine works through darkness as much as through light. Without the night, dawn would have no meaning. Without death, life would forget its pulse. There's a sense of symmetry in all things now. The dualities that once tore you apart begin to dance. Masculine and feminine, reason and instinct, spirit and body. They no longer fight for dominance. They create together. This is the sacred marriage the alchemists spoke of, the union of opposites within the self. You feel its quiet ecstasy unfolding in your chest. A harmony that requires no perfection. A love that includes everything it once denied. And yet this peace is not static. It breathes. It trembles. It remains alive through contrast. You still feel anger, fear, and doubt. But now they pass through you without anchoring. They no longer define you because you no longer defend against them. The shadow walks beside you, not as burden, but as balance. You've stopped trying to be healed. You've started to be whole. Integration is not an end. It's a rhythm. Some days you walk in light, some days you fall into shadow. Both are sacred. You stop measuring progress. You stop labeling emotions as high or low. You begin to see your life as an ongoing alchemy, a series of dissolvings and reunions. You no longer need to fix yourself. You only need to listen. Every feeling is a message. Every silence is a doorway. The shadow still tests you. It appears in moments of pride, in flashes of judgment, and in the ache of old habits. But now you meet it differently. You thank it for its honesty. You let it remind you that the work is never done, that evolution is a spiral, not a straight line. The psyche continues to refine itself through every encounter, every loss, and every love. Nothing is wasted. Even the setbacks shimmer with meaning when you look with clear eyes. You realize that what you once called darkness was only unlived life. Potential energy waiting for consciousness to embrace it. The parts you feared most now reveal themselves as gifts. Anger becomes clarity. Grief becomes compassion. Desire becomes devotion. Each emotion transmuted through awareness. This is the philosopher's stone hidden within you, turning lead into light. And in the quiet that follows, you understand why the shadow never wanted to be healed. Healing was too small a word for what it held. It wanted recognition. It wanted reunion. It wanted to feel God through your eyes. The moment you stopped demanding perfection, it finally returned home. Not as something conquered, but as something remembered. Now, when you stand before the mirror, you see no division. The light and the darkness breathe together, forming one living reflection. The shadow is no longer behind you. It is within you, alive, luminous, and whole. You exhale softly, and the breath that leaves your lips feels like prayer. Not to escape, but to remain. Not to become, but to be. You've come far, though distance means little in the language of the soul. What matters is depth. You've walked through fire and silence, through fear and tenderness, and each step has stripped you of illusion. What remains is not perfection, but presence. You start to understand that wholeness is not something you reach. It's what emerges when you stop dividing yourself, when you let every fragment speak its truth, when you allow light and shadow to share the same breath. The journey inward is not a triumph, it's a remembering. You stand in the middle of your own being, surrounded by echoes of all the selves you've been. The child who feared rejection, the lover who clung to pain, the wanderer who mistook freedom for escape. They all gather around you now, not as burdens, but as witnesses. They do not ask for forgiveness, they ask to be included. And as you open your heart to them, something wordless happens. A silence deepens, and within it, peace begins to bloom. The shadow, once wild and defiant, has softened. It still carries its mystery, but it no longer hides. It has learned to speak through intuition, through the body, through dreams that no longer terrify but guide. You begin to notice how the same energy that once fueled your chaos now fuels your creation. The same intensity that once burned your peace now illuminates your path. You are no longer at war with yourself. You have become a field where all things can coexist. This state is fragile, yet infinite. It moves with your breath. Inhale, expansion. Exhale, surrender. Each cycle reaffirms the unity of opposites. You no longer need to seek healing because nothing within you is excluded. The wound is still there, but it glows differently now. It has become a doorway, a place where spirit enters matter. You touch it without fear. It no longer bleeds, it sings. And when you look back, you realize the shadow never resisted healing out of malice. It resisted because healing meant erasure. It fought to protect its sacred chaos, the rawness that kept you human. Without it, you would have become an image of light without substance, a ghost of purity. The shadow anchored you in flesh, in passion, in the truth that divinity needs both fire and form to be alive. You see now that it never wanted to be healed because it was never sick. It was sacred all along. As you walk out of the inner forest, dawn greets you. The air carries the scent of new beginnings, though nothing outside has changed. The trees still stand, the river still flows, but you see them differently. The world mirrors your integration. The sky doesn't divide the sun from the clouds. It holds them both in harmony. And so do you. Light and shadow, joy and grief, creation and destruction. You no longer seek balance as escape. You live it as devotion. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings. Not loud, but resonant. Its echo travels through the landscape of your mind like a ripple through still water. You feel it settle in your chest. You realize it's not calling you to move forward, but to arrive. To be here. To know that everything you were searching for was always waiting in the center of your being. The shadow didn't need your healing. It needed your love. And love, when it is true, doesn't divide. It integrates. It redeems. It makes even the darkness shine. You sit for a moment, watching the light filter through the branches. It touches your face softly, like forgiveness. You close your eyes and breathe. Not to escape, but to merge. The air feels different now. It carries a quiet knowing, the kind that doesn't demand proof. Somewhere within that stillness, you sense a whisper. It doesn't come from above or below. It comes from within, and it says, with a tenderness older than time, that you are finally whole. You stay still for a long while, as if the silence itself is breathing through you. The forest fades, yet its rhythm remains. The pulse of the earth, the murmur of unseen roots, the quiet hum of existence beneath thought. You no longer ask what any of it means. You simply feel its presence. The line between what is inside and what is outside dissolves, and you recognize the same pulse within your chest. It was never a journey toward light or away from darkness. It was always a return to rhythm. The mind still tries to name what happened. It calls it healing, awakening, it calls transformation. But the soul doesn't care for words. The soul moves in tides. What was hidden rises. What was known sinks. And the cycle continues. You see that nothing is final. Even peace shifts, even clarity fades. But now you welcome that movement. The impermanence doesn't frighten you. It reminds you that you are part of something alive, something endlessly creating itself through contrast. The shadow walks quietly beside you, not as teacher, not as foe, but as companion. You no longer flinch when it appears. You listen. You let it speak through feeling, through intuition, through those small moments when the truth hums just beneath your breath. You know now that the sacred doesn't hide in light alone. It lives in the folds of grief, in the patience of silence, in the ordinary grace of your imperfection. Every breath feels like a prayer now. Not to change, but to remember. Not to rise, but to remain aware. You understand that the work of the soul is not to perfect itself, but to embrace itself fully. The divine is not waiting in some distant heaven. It is the quiet awareness watching through your eyes. It is the acceptance that allows you to love what once felt unlovable. It is the pulse that continues, even when everything else falls away. As the last light fades, you feel something unspoken settle inside you. Not triumph, not closure, but peace. The kind that doesn't shout its arrival. The kind that simply is. The kind that doesn't erase the pain, but lets it belong. You realize the shadow never needed to be healed because it was never separate from you. It was the voice of the forgotten God within, asking to be remembered. You inhale softly, exhale slower, and in that stillness there is only one truth left. You are not divided. You are not lost. You are the light, and the shadow breathing as one. And in the quiet that follows, you feel the universe exhale through you, as if it too had been waiting for this moment of surrender. The night deepens, yet it no longer feels dark. It feels complete. The shadow rests. The self is whole. And in that sacred stillness, something ancient whispers through your being. Be still now. You are finally home.